Welcome to the Building Blocks podcast, where we discuss the career paths of leaders in the energy, utility, and construction fields to better understand the habits, routines, and mindset that has built these successful men and women. I'm your host, Brad Coleman. It took me 20 years to understand my strengths. My goal is to identify the common traits of leaders in our industry to provide you with the tools you need to be successful in a fraction of that time. Thank you for listening. For more information on these guests and others, please come find me on LinkedIn. Thank you for listening. For more information on these guests and others, please come find me on LinkedIn. Welcome to the Building Blocks podcast. I'm your host, Brad Coleman. This is where we dissect the experiences, wisdom from those of us that have been around for several years for the purpose of extracting the highlights and lessons learned, very often from our mistakes, for those in the younger generation just coming up through the workforce and trying to find their own way. Today I'm joined by Nathan Henson. He is the Vice President of Business Operations for Energy Worldnet. Energy Worldnet is a OQ compliance organization, software development company within the oil and gas space. Nathan can fill in some more details about that, but he's been in the software industry within the utility sector for most of his working career. Nathan, thanks for joining us today, and can you introduce yourself and maybe fill in a little bit of details about your background that I may have missed?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Brad. So, like you said, I've been in the industry specifically around software as a service or SaaS applications for about almost going on 15 years now. And started off with an organization down in Dallas, was there for about 8 years before moving back to Oklahoma, was with another SaaS company here in Tulsa for about a year and a half before COVID hit. And then during that pandemic, ended up actually getting reconnected with some old friends and ended up over at Energy Worldnet, and I'm going on 4 years now with Energy Worldnet. So it's been a lot of fun. But yeah, I'm located up here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I'm a dad. I've got 3 amazing kids. My wife is Candace. She's everything. And she is a physical therapist here in town. So we run a pretty active life, kind of had a lot going on with young kids and school. And so being a part of these organizations, and I work in a remote environment. Energy Worldnet is based out of North Fort Worth, out of Decatur, Texas. And so as one of our about 20% that's fully remote employees, it's been an interesting change. Having gone from a completely in-office setting to going completely remote and traveling to the office about once a month, it's been really, really interesting to kind of take that shift, and it's allowed for some unique perspectives and insights and opportunities as well. So that's a little bit about me and what I've been doing.
Yeah, thank you. And I know that I knew a lot of your backstory through the time that we had talked about different things. What led you into the software area to begin with? It looks like you started kind of as a project manager. I mean, what did that route look like just at the starting point of your career and maybe where you began?
Yeah, great question. So I have several brothers. One of them, actually 2 of them, ended up in tech, and I never really saw myself going into software. I ended up going to school actually to become a veterinarian, and a couple of years into that realized I just didn't want that long-term path, and so I ended up switching gears, went into business, ended up kind of focusing in the entrepreneurship department at Oklahoma State, and kind of fell in love with this concept called entrepreneurship. So we were applying the entrepreneurial concepts within existing businesses and helping keep them kind of new and fresh and doing things a little bit different. And this was long before ideas of disruption were really a thing for businesses. It was the common key terms at the time were guerrilla tactics and, how can we just get creative? And so when I took those into the first company who I went to work with down in Dallas, I really, even in the interview process, kind of brought those things there. But what that company did was they started everybody in a customer service setting, right? And the reason for that was why would you take a college grad and put them into customer service? And the reason they did that was because they knew that you needed to do two things to be really successful within that organization. You needed to understand your customers. You needed to understand the pain, what they were going through, what value you were creating for them, how you service them, how to talk to them, just understand who they are and what they're trying to do. And then secondly, you had to learn the software. You couldn't be successful in that role if you didn't understand how the software worked and how to help solve problems for your clients in that seat. And so through that, I got to doing that for about a year before I moved into a different role that was more of a proactive customer service and account management type of a role. And then that second year, I really did some deep diving into, what was it that I really enjoyed and wanted to do. And I found kind of this analytical side of me that really wanted to kind of bridge my unique skills with where the company had needs, and that opened a door into what became product management. And so I jumped into that seat head first, and that put me on a journey of about 6 years in product management before I ended up finding the next company. And so that was really where I made the big shift into software and kind of fell in love with this idea of software and what it is we could do and create value in a way that was not just relational with our clients, but it was tangible. There was something we could actually produce that helped solve a problem.
What age were you think, whenever you kind of started making that pivot into product management, when you started asking those hard questions of yourself?
Yeah, I was probably 24, somewhere in there. And so 24 years old, had just gotten married, was young in my married life. I think we were probably a couple years into our marriage, didn't have any kids at the time. We were just kind of enjoying life. We were running marathons, we were traveling, we were doing whatever it was we wanted to do as young adults. And so this was really the opportunity to kind of dive in and learn something completely new without having all these obligations and other concerns of what life usually brings as you kind of get further and further into your career.
Yeah, you're a little younger than what I would have suspected. I have a theory. It was my observation when I was around late 20s, around the age of 30. I noticed a lot of my friends around my same age either changing careers, going back to school for a different degree, deciding that whatever they had been trained for, they didn't want any part of anymore. Some going back and getting their MBAs. Mm-hmm. I'm sure that it's a lot of kind of the self-awareness that you're talking about. But there seems to be a pattern with get our first job, get established. At that point, you're so young that you're really trying to find your own identity and even figure out who you are. But then once you do kind of start to get a little bit of a foothold, those that seem to be successful with the next stage of their career have the ability to develop that self-awareness that you're talking about, to say, okay, not only this is what I enjoy, this is what I don't enjoy. Sometimes it's about not doing things in your career that you just don't enjoy, but also these are my strengths and these are my weaknesses. I loved my time at a SaaS company, the small amount of time that I did, but I learned real quickly I am not an internal sales rep. I do not cold call. It does not go well for me. But I do love demoing the products, understanding how it works, why it works, and sitting in the seat of the user to understand how they need to be able to have the software function so that they can do their job better. Mm-hmm. I loved that aspect of it. And I didn't even know until I was thrown into that was even a thing. So I love your insight there and how you really kind of started to ask some of those hard questions of yourself. Because that seems to be what sets us up for a lot of our experiences with that next stage. And it helps when those are done very early in our careers, before kids and before. I always say those early 20s are the time when we have the ability to take a few more risks because we have less obligations, financial obligations and whatnot.
Yeah. I think there's so much to unpack there. There's, everything from, I'm a big Clift fan, so, understanding not only what is in your top 5, your top 10, understanding that first of all, there is no weakness, right, in all 34 of those strengths. They're all a strength, and it just takes more effort to pull those things that are further down the list up into your top. But what was most empowering about that was understanding these top 5, 10, this is what I bring to work every single day. This is what I bring into my personal relationships. This is what Nathan brings to the table, right? And so understanding that there is something unique about me. There's a unique value and thing that I can bring to the table. And that was one of the first things that really helped me understand, like, I've got a purpose in this world, right? Everybody kind of wants to feel like I've got something to add. But when you look at it from that perspective, you start to understand, hey, I actually have something that's unique that I can bring in. And I don't have to worry about all those other things. Those are great. I can do those. But if I have to spend the effort to pull that thing up, could I actually get what I need to get accomplished done better if I went and found Brad, who's got different strengths than I do, in his top 5, and then together we just collaborate, we work together, and we produce something that's even better. So I think looking at what it was that I naturally, without any effort, kind of brought to the table, what it was that I loved to do, and finding those things that where I was just naturally adding value. I think the other thing that you touch on too is, kind of doing that deeper dive and learning about yourself. And for me, I was on a little bit of a different path than most. I think a lot of people probably look at, what is it that I want to do? What do I want to do? What do I love to do? And go find something after a few years of being in their career that goes down that path. And for me, what I always told myself, I would get into these spots about every 1 to 2 years. I'd get into a spot and go, is this the year? Is this the year that I go and find something else? Is this the year that I try to figure out something new? And what led me to actually stay in that role for 8 years was I'm still learning. And I made a decision fairly early on in my career that I said, if I'm still learning somewhere, if I stop learning, that's when I need to find something else. But as long as I'm still learning and there's more to learn, I'm going to stay here and I'm going to learn everything I love about it. If I stop and I just hate what I'm doing, fine, we'll go find something else. But as long as I didn't absolutely hate it, maybe I needed to ask myself, why do I hate it? Do I hate it because it's pushing me in a direction where I'm uncomfortable and I really just need to sharpen and learn this? Or do I hate it because this is just not in alignment with what my core values are or what I want out of life or whatever the case is? So I think even when we get to those points where we start getting to that 5-year mark in our career and we're asking ourselves, is there something better I should be doing or something different I should be doing? I think we have to ask ourselves, why are we looking at making that change? What's our motivating factors for that? And, I'm also a firm believer that opportunities are there for a reason. And so we need to uncover and figure out, have we accomplished what we've been put here in this role at this time for? And once we've accomplished that, then maybe we look for the new opportunity, the new door that's been opened.
Jesse Hernandez, who I've had on the podcast as well, as follow him on LinkedIn. He's great for insights into lean construction and building. He had a post just this morning where he said that I found that when I'm in growth mode, there tends to be about a 5-year cycle to where I'm constantly growing, and then I desire change, seek change about every 5 years. And the more I do it, the more it expedites that cycle. Mm-hmm. He said, now I'm down to, I feel like, about 2 years, to where, because the more you do it, the more you crave that growth within yourself, the more you tend to, I guess for lack of a better term, outgrow whatever shell you are in and you're looking for. So no, I think that's another recurring theme for sure. So
it's a system. He's creating a system. And so through that system, he's being able to perfect that over 5 years, get that down to 2 years. And then that same cycle is exactly what, whether it's your personal growth or your business growth, we all go through these S curves, right? And at some point we start to plateau, and that's when you change something up and you start to make that steep growth again.
I've also found that there's a pretty direct correlation between the busyness of life and some of the I don't want to say the stress of life, just the things that happen to us in life. Mm-hmm. And it's only been within the last 5 years. Well, really, we were forced into it in COVID when our business lives were immediately merged into our personal lives, right?
Yeah.
And everything became one and the lines became very blurred. But I find that the different seasons of life that we're in also kind of dictate where I am from my own personal growth standpoint. Late 20s, early 30s, when we were having kids, and that's a time to focus inward more toward the family. I was still having to stay challenged in my job and still was wanting a certain amount of personal growth and striving for more for myself. But at the same time, you have to understand that's a time where I need to focus on a little more stability, maybe, than, and not necessarily take some of the risks. I think that the different seasons of life bring us also dictate a lot of that as well. So you were very active, you were very intentional in looking for your growth and the next stage, and even within that organization that you were in, it looks like you held several different positions. I assume that was just kind of the different stages of your growth.
Yeah.
Were you aggressively looking for your next position within the organization? Were you being kind of tapped on the shoulder and identified as, hey, you should apply for this, or you need to look into this, or what did that look like within the organization?
I think those taps on the shoulders came when there were large shifts. And then the smaller incremental, that was just kind of the natural progression of the career, or as I was kind of figuring out different pieces and doing well with them, and then you get promoted or you get moved around to focus on something else. The organization I was with at that time was real focused on continuing to grow you as an individual. You didn't want to stagnate, so they would actually intentionally move you around to different areas because of the concept of learning through osmosis, right? You become an expert in one area and then you move to another area and you help. Not only are you learning something new, but that team gets better because they get to capitalize on everything you're bringing to the team. And so when I made that shift from kind of this proactive account management and customer service role to a product management role, I had an individual who saw I was digging in, trying to do some self-identification, and said, hey, there's something here. I want to capitalize on that. They put me on their team. And that's kind of where I spent the next 6 years. And right around that 5.5, 6 year mark, another big shift was happening. And so I actually ended up towards the end of my career there, and the two events are not correlated, but I ended up getting moved, and then shortly, a couple months after that, we relocated back to Tulsa for some family stuff that was going on. And so ended up back in Tulsa, but before we did that, that shift was from product management back into account management. And we were working with some of our largest clients to really help them take everything we had learned in product over the last 6 years and bring that unique perspective to the clients and help solve their problems right on the front lines. And so you got to see that value get created in a new kind of way that sometimes it stagnates when you're behind the curtain and don't see all that value happening and see the aha moments that happen with the clients. And so it kind of ebbs and flows, right? It wasn't always as somebody tapping on your shoulder. It wasn't always that I was pushing and pursuing for it. Sometimes life just happens and you relocate 5 hours down the road and you look for the next big opportunity. And what was really neat about that is when I walked into the next opportunity here in Tulsa, that organization had a need, and they needed somebody. They wanted to kind of take their product development to the next level. And so I came in and I said, well, I know enough. Let's see what we can do to help get it the next step further. So I ended up actually leading a software development team. And so I got to wear all the hats and learn all the things that happened even further behind the curtain, and what it was like to recruit and hire developers, not being a developer myself, and make sure that you got quality candidates and all the economics that go into that. And what was neat was, not only did we build a really successful team and our product was headed in a great direction, we got to create, this is a company who traditionally didn't have a software development team and didn't know how to manage a software development team. And so we ended up actually moving that all in-house, doing development, creating all the policies, procedures, all the things that were needed to make them successful, And if you've ever worked with software developers, one of the things that they love in the industry is that they love to work remotely. They wanted to be working from home. And so we advocated for a long time. That was not something that the company had done traditionally. And so we advocated for a long time what it would look like to put those policies and procedures in place. And we got the approval, we got the policies, everything was in place, right? And they started doing it. And it probably was 4 months, 5, 6 months after we had all that in place that COVID hit. And everybody remembers. It's almost like 9/11 or any other major event. Like, you remember where you were when you got that news that everything was shutting down and you were going home for the foreseeable future and you didn't know when you were going back to work or anything. Everybody just went home unless you were one of the select few that was, I forget what term they used, but basically mission critical to keep the economy and everything, life going as we knew it. Yeah. And so every company, and even Energy Worldnet has their own story about how this happened before I came along. But everybody remembers at the flip of a switch, you had to go home and everybody was remote. Yeah. And what was neat to see was all that work that we had put into making this something that we wanted to give as kind of a value proposition to our employees, our software developers. We were able to, in one day, adopt those policies across the company, and everything was done very quickly. So we didn't miss a whole lot. It was very easy to implement all those things across the rest of the company, operations, account management, sales, everything. And they were all remote in 24 hours. So
you just
it was
spent
really
time
neat.
Planning for something that you didn't know that you were planning for. Everybody else had to do on the fly.
Yeah. And it's neat. I get to share that story because that was my experience, and that EWN actually had a similar experience setting those up and then doing that for their development team and then adopting that for the rest of the company. And a lot of other companies did too. So it's neat because now you've got this talking point with people and you're like, yeah, I got to do that too. Wasn't that cool?
Yeah. No, it definitely is one of those monumental things where you remember where you were. And not that, just the steps leading up to it, the days and weeks, even leading up to the murmurs and whispers that we started hearing and stuff. So I want to talk, we talked even before we started recording, we talked about EWN. Tell us a little bit about EWN, your path through EWN, what you do now from a software standpoint, integrated with the utility industry, and kind of how all of that ties together.
Yeah, so my journey into EWN was a little bit unique in that I had actually worked with a couple of these folks in Dallas prior. And so 5 months into COVID and all of that, I got a call and the guy said I was actually looking for another position. I was part of a significant reduction in force that happened during COVID. And so I kind of switched gears. I was going somewhere completely different, got into real estate, was just needed a break from tech. And I got a call, and it was one of my buddies from years ago, and said, hey, we've got an opportunity. You should really come check out what's going on with EWN. It's a great company. People are good, all the things. I said, okay, well, 5 months into this new real estate thing, I was ready to kind of get back into tech and looking for an opportunity. And so I did. And at the time, what they hired me for was kind of a business analyst, kind of general position to really help with drafting requirements. They had needed a lot of software to be built, but they needed somebody who understood how to write those requirements in a way that could kind of speak the language between business and software development. And so I had created a career on that for 6 years. So jumped into that seat. We started making some changes. I worked with the director to kind of make some changes to the roles within about 6 months or so, to start shifting from business analysts to product managers so that they could really kind of take a larger perspective solution finding to the role. And so after that, my approach to getting some of the software items out the door, I had my PMP. It had my PMP certification for probably about 4 years at that point. And they saw not only the certification, but how I was executing the work and getting it done. And they said, hey, we really have been thinking about launching this PMO, this project management office. What would you think about, taking this on? You've got your PMP, your project management professional certification. We think you'd be great at launching this. Is it something you're interested in, or do you want to stay in the product management role? And at the time I said, it would be comfortable for me to stay in product management. I know it. I've been helping build it. I can stay here. It's comfortable. I know it. Or we can go out and we can try something new. And I think one of the things that makes Energy Worldnet probably the most unique organization that I've ever been a part of or even been affiliated with in any way is Energy Worldnet. From the top down, they believe in giving opportunities for you to grow and try something new, bring value in a new way. And if it doesn't work, we'll find something else for you to do. You can go back to what it was you were doing before and you'll keep being successful, but let's try this out. Fail and fail fast, and let's learn from it. And so it's really unique and refreshing to be part of an organization that does that, because it shows that they're wanting to grow. They're willing to not only invest in you, but they want to grow as an organization and they want you to grow as an individual. And so it's just kind of the perfect mix of everything. So I jumped into the PMO role, started kind of building that up, not only managing projects, but really bringing a consistent approach to projects so that they were repeatable over and over and over, and we could get metrics and we could help people understand how to get successful outcomes faster and better and less expensive and learn lessons and all the things that happen within a PMO, right? And as we started doing that, another opportunity came up after we got the governance and all that in place where we could begin to hand that off to somebody else. Another opportunity came up to lead our operations area. And so now I went from being this individual contributor on a team of product to another individual contributor role, but still kind of being an indirect leader within the organization on how we do projects effectively, to then moving into being a leader over multiple teams and multiple people. And it was disparate teams, like very different teams, right? They didn't all necessarily go together. So I actually have in the business operations unit, we have our HR department, we have our PMO, we have our Scrum Master who works with our software development reporting into PMO. We have our internal education, employee education, learning development group as well. And then we actually have our education team itself. So the team who works on putting together all of the content, the libraries, the client-specific projects and development that goes into their learning management, into the EWM platform, and then to their learning management programs and OQ programs. And so it's interesting. You've got these very different teams that don't necessarily all work together on a day-to-day basis, but you're still leading forward towards some common vision. And I think that's where the power of some significant changes that we made at EWN a couple of years ago to adopt the entrepreneurial operating system, EOS, really came in handy, because we now were able to take this concept of goals and things that we wanted, but really rallying everyone together to a common vision that they could all see. They could all see the role that they play in it and knew exactly what it was that was being expected of them and how they could measure whether they were being successful. Not just coming at this from a management perspective of, hey, are you doing what you need to be doing, but allowing people, coming alongside them and giving them tools where you can see as an individual contributor, I see where I'm hitting the mark. I can self-manage. And that's the goal of anybody in leadership or manage, right? None of us really want to micromanage. We all want team players who can get in there and they self-manage and they take the initiative. And so what we did was, through this adoption and our journey of EOS, is really helping people understand what tools they had at their disposal and what they could use to help self-manage, help understand what it was, how well they were doing. And they know if they're not performing. They know if they're not hitting the mark. They don't need somebody to come to them or tell them once a year in a performance review, hey, you're not hitting the mark. We talk about stuff on a weekly basis. We coach every play. We really focus in on these core values in absolutely everything we do. We have our vision traction organizer on my desk, looking at it multiple times a day, guiding every decision that we do. And so having that centralized vision has really been a game changer for us. And I'm thrilled that I got to be just to play a small part in bringing EOS into the organization and seeing how that has helped us grow over the last couple of years.
What does the coaching aspect of that look like, and within EOS? And just to define, EOS is Entrepreneurial Operating System, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I didn't even realize. I mean, it's an entire sub community that
Yes.
if people wanted to, they can get certified in, and there are multiple books on how to set it up and how to execute. And I mean, it can be a completely turnkey operating system for an organization, because even to say entrepreneurial operating system is a bit of a misnomer. But what does the coaching aspect within the organization look like for individuals? Because everybody
Yeah.
has to buy into that vision, right? In order for all of this, like you're saying, to fit perfectly. And obviously we want a bunch of leaders that will or have the ability to self-direct and self-lead. And I mean, I'm not asking about like specifics,
Yeah.
but what does that look like from a mentoring standpoint within the organization, or how does EOS define that?
Yeah, so within EOS, there's 6 components, and one of those 6 components is the people component, and really ensuring you've got right people in right seats. So within this people component, I mean, kind of sidestep a little bit. There is a book within the Traction Library called How to Be a Great Boss. And How to Be a Great Boss talks about a lot of different ways that if, whether you're you may be a Clifton Strengths organization and you don't want to refer to anybody as a boss. You want to refer to them as a coach. And there's a whole concept that Clifton Strengths has that takes people through a journey called Boss to Coach. We're actually adopting that and taking some of our leadership through that program later this year. But when you look at that book, one of the concepts in there is LMA, leadership plus management equals accountability, right? And there's 5 leadership principles, there's 5 management principles, and if you do both of those well, because let's be honest, one has to do with work, one has to do with leading people. You're managing work, leading people, and they have to marry together in order to create this really solid accountability for everybody. And part of what's in there in the LMA concept is if you're a people leader, you're expected, when we do your accountability chart, which is kind of a more advanced organizational chart, that accountability chart says of the 5 things that you do in your role, when you sit in this seat, there's 5 things that you're responsible for. One of those is LMA. You've got to do leadership management and accountability well. Well, when you do that, you're practicing these 5 leadership principles and 5 management principles. And some of that is, am I communicating clearly well with them? Am I doing this regularly? Am I setting clear expectations? Am I equipping people with the tools and the resources and the people and the time and everything that they need? So you go through, and I won't give you all the details. Go check out the book, go read into LMA. But when you take the concept of LMA and you apply that within your people component of EOS, and you begin to look and see that there's actually a lot more that we can do to help coach people. They provide a framework called the 555 framework. And what that does is it's not about a specific form or this really rigid way to talk to your employees. It's really about saying, hey, here's a framework, right? When we have whether you're meeting every other week or once a month or once a quarter, you want to talk to your employees and figure out, are you leading them well? Are you managing them well? It's a two-way street, right? I'm not telling you everything and then just expecting you to go off and do something. As a leader, I want to hear from you. I need to know that I'm leading you well. I need to know that I'm managing you well. This is a two-way street. And so I think part of the coaching concept is understanding that we don't know it all, right? We have to work together as a team. We may have a report to leader type relationship, but this is still a team. And so we've got to figure out how to work together. And so when you do that, your expectations are clear. You start to realize, man, I've missed this thing that you were trying to tell me. You were trying to give me the warning signs, and I was just going a million miles an hour and totally missed it. These types of conversations using the 555 framework really allow us to dive in and go, hey, how do you feel about these core values? Do you align to those? Where do you have concerns about core values? Let's have a conversation on that. Okay, now let's go talk about the 5 rocks or the 5 numbers that you're responsible for. How are you doing in that? Let's talk about the 5 roles that you are responsible for within the seat that you occupy on the accountability chart. And when we look at the 555 framework, it's a framework for our conversations with these people. It's helping us understand how to coach them through the things that they're responsible for, the things that are most important for the business, and the things that help them align to our culture and who we are as an organization when it comes to core values. So we get to kind of coach that. We get to leverage and lean on our strengths as a Clifton Strengths organization. We look at what are your top 5 and how can we best give you opportunities and use your strengths in the organization. So we're looking at so many different pieces to really help add value to the organization, but also bring value to the employees so they can understand where they are. Because I firmly believe that down deep, every employee or every person in general wants to add value, whatever they do, right? I firmly believe everybody takes pride in their work and they want to work hard and they want to do a good job. And when you have those types of employees, and that's vast majority of them, you've got something you can work with, right? Now we can come at this from a coaching perspective and just equip them with the tools and help them understand and paint that vision and give them everything that they need to be successful, and then just kind of keep them on track. There's a concept within LMA that takes these 2 circles. And if you have 2 circles that are not touching each other, they're sitting out here, right? This basically means you're not having enough touch bases or enough communication with your employees, that you're not able to give them enough vision, and they're not able to give you the information that you need to be a successful leader and be in the kind of top level meetings that you're in. So you're missing, right? There's just not enough communication going on. And the opposite of that is if these circles are too overlapping, you're smothering each other, right? You're not actually getting work done. These circles need to overlap just enough where you're getting the information that you need, they're getting the information that they need, they're getting the direction, the vision, all the different pieces that they need, but they're not getting too much. They're not being smothered. They have just enough to go and be successful themselves. You've got enough that you can continue to do your job well and continue leading the organization. And so there is a balance, and it's not the same for every employee. Every employee has something different. Some of them it's once a quarter I got to touch base. Others it's every 2 weeks.
And it's changed so much now since COVID, since we talk about working remotely. I would imagine that it becomes even more imperative that you make sure and keep the open lines of communication. Well, okay, I was going to kind of pivot to something different, but answer this one more question then for me. Is there a secret sauce to finding just the right overlap? I mean, you don't have to go into the level of detail that EOS does, I'm sure, but I mean, there has to be some key indicators to look for or tips, right?
Yeah. And it's probably not a very good secret sauce, but for me, I would say it's get started and be vulnerable. That's it. If you don't ever get started, it doesn't matter. Society as a whole, we cripple ourselves by not making a decision. We want to make the right decision so badly that we overanalyze. But the reality is, and you'll hear this echoed multiple times in different EOS books, is it's better to make the wrong decision and change it than it is to never make a decision at all. And so make the decision. Just get started. Do it. Forward momentum is better than no momentum, even in the wrong direction, because you can steer a car that's moving. You can't steer a parked car. So get started. And then secondly, be vulnerable, because so much of our pride and other things get in the way, and it prevents us from talking about what really needs to be talked about. We think it should be this, but when we ask the right questions, and there's other books like, It Doesn't Hurt to Ask by Trey Gowdy, and there's others that really help you figure out how to open the lines of communication and ask questions where you're getting more and you start to understand, hey, I thought we needed to go this direction, we need to go that one. Having those vulnerable conversations and just realizing we're all people who really want the best for the organization or for whatever it is we're trying to accomplish. Let's all work together to accomplish that in our own areas.
Do you feel that remote work hinders the vulnerability between people? And kind of as a 1B question to that, are you, from a personal standpoint, are you a cameras on or cameras off kind of meetings guy? Because I think that also adds a lot to it, right?
It does. So I'll answer them in reverse. I'm a cameras on guy, because there's just so much of communication is nonverbal. And so even when you can't be in person, if I can see you from here up, right, there's still more communication that I can get and make sure that the message is coming across. I can practice active listening and I can ask you, this is what I heard you say, whatever, but there's still other components to communication that you need in order to make sure that we're on the same page. Being on the same page is so important. And so I do think that you can get creative and you can do a lot of uncomfortable things that will help you get almost there virtually. But there are still going to be opportunities where the in-person is just going to be better. Whether it depends on the meeting, but there, I would say 90% or more you can do virtually. But there are some specific things that you really got to get in person and have some tough conversations, because people are just more comfortable having those types of hard conversations when you're in person.
I think the next evolution of remote work will be, okay, we need to be a little more strategic with our time. There are certain things that are really need to be done in person, and there are certain things that we know we can work best head down, focus kind of time, maybe when we're remote, and we can turn off the notifications. And I would love to see our culture evolve into the next iteration of work from home being, we're going to come in the office, but when we're going to be very focused with this is your time for meetings, this is your time for one-on-one. I don't know what it looks like. Every organization is probably going to have to make their own determination. But
I won't go off on the tangent, but I do think you're tapping into something that's big, right? How do we, and it goes beyond just focus, but I think that it's a key. You're tapping into our mental health balance, right? As people who work from home, we tend to leak the hours here. We work a little bit more. The concept of people don't work enough, there's some of those people out there. However, there are others who work way more than their 40, 50, 60 hours a week because it's too easy to just keep it going and not turn it off. And that's where the focus tools will help.
Even if I start an hour early, I say I'm going to start an hour early. And sometimes that's even 6:30, unfortunately, just because I have the time available and I know that it's quiet and the phone's not going to be ringing. I say, but that's okay. I'll stop at 3:30 because I have somewhere to be or I have something to do. Most of the time, I still end up working till 5. It's like you said, that time just kind of leaks.
Yeah, 5 becomes 5:30, becomes 6:30, and you're like, wow, I didn't realize everybody had been home that long. It's time to go.
Well, that kind of leads into kind of backdoor of what we were talking about earlier before the call, and that is generational work, particularly in the utility and construction space. But you're bringing a different approach to the utility space, coming from strictly a software background, which I love that, because there's a different culture in software, a very specific culture, like you're saying, more apt to be accepting of work from home before any of the other really trades or industries were. But we talked about Energy Worldnet, 2 of your executives, Jim and James, that do a lot of trade shows, have their own podcast, Coffee with Jim and James. I told you I completely fanboy those guys and their podcast. But they have a keynote speech that they give about claim your seat at the table. And one of the things that they talk about is the intergenerational work environment that we're in now. What do you think the younger generation and how we're adapting to work can kind of teach us from not only work from home of how we work, but also integrating software into our current lives? I mean, we like to look at it from top down. The mentorship and the lessons learned and the, for lack of a better word, the old guard, which is not meant to be a disrespectful term. But those of us that are more experienced, mentoring the younger, but from the software integration of software in our lives, what do you see as the way going forward with technology in our culture and our industry?
Yeah, I mean, technology is shifting so quickly and so rapidly, and it's hard to keep up with. We've talked about these different industries that, sometimes they figure out that you can maintain a certain technology for a very long period of time, much longer than you would think the life cycle should be for technology, and yet it still produces the result that they need, and so it's good enough, right? And that's a dangerous spot to be in when you're looking at trying to grow, especially grow your business and your organization and make a bigger footprint in the industry. And I think, when your industry or when your organization, if you're in one of those areas and they don't want to adopt new technology, or they're not looking to actively adopt new technology, you've got to go a different direction, right? You've got to go and figure out how do you leverage people in that way. And I think our younger generations, and we've got what Jim and James talk about, it's 5 generations now that are in the workplace. And so you've got 5 generations. We've got kids who have no idea what life was like before an iPad and a phone in your hands 10 hours out of the day. What they've grown up seeing. They've grown up seeing that adults that do everything on their phone. They don't know that paper maps ever existed. They don't know that there was ever a corded phone or any of this other stuff that we still use the technology for today. But because they've learned on their own how to use this technology without somebody being there to teach them, they actually figure it out a whole lot faster. We have something that we can learn from these individuals. And so we need to be tapping into these individuals and say, hey, if you go back to our previous topic that we were talking about, you've got to have that vulnerability and two-way conversation with those folks so that you can be aware of the things that they're seeing, right? As leaders, we typically see our slice of the pie and we see what's going on and we can see big picture and what it is we're trying to create, but we miss so many of the other things that are happening because we're not close here, right? It's perspective. These individuals who are in the younger generation, they see something, and I'm as guilty as anybody else, thinking, what is that person going to teach me? But I have to, just like I challenged myself early on in my career, hey, let's take a second, let's pause, let's look and try to learn something new. What is it we're trying to do? If we take that same approach and say, hey, what can this person teach me about how to adopt this technology, or even what can they do how can I give them an opportunity so I don't have to figure out the technology, right? Let's work smarter, not harder. Let me give them an opportunity to bring that technology into the organization so that we can all learn more rapidly.
And you're asking, I feel like, gosh, if we can nail this just as a culture, it's going to be so good for us, because we've always had this pay your dues kind of attitude. I'm not going to say just in the way that way I grew up in the industry, and I think they all tend to be like that. But we've never looked at it from a bottom up. We've never asked the younger generation to bring this level of value, because they have the foresight of, they don't know it. They probably they take it for granted, like you said, because they've never known anything except growing up with an iPad in their hands. But if we can study how they work and how they interact with the technology in order to be able to understand ways of making working easier. And I think that's a lot of what we're going to see in the growth of artificial intelligence in the next couple of years, is how it's implemented to create more efficiencies.
Yeah, I think it's that. I think it's also it's pulling a lot from Simon Sinek and helping people understand why, right? I don't need to understand all the technology. It'd be great if I did, but we don't have enough hours in the day for you to teach me everything. And honestly, I'm probably not going to learn as fast as I could have 15 years ago. However, if I can give you an opportunity and I can teach you why this is important, let me help you connect the dots between what it is that you know from a technology perspective and what I know from having come up through the ranks and worked hard to get here. Let me help connect you, and I'm going to help fast track you here, right? And I'm going to butcher this, but there's a belief that I have that, if as leaders, if we try to be like the sun and be the shining star, we're going to fail every time. But if we will try to take more of the moon approach, let me make somebody else who reports to me as a leader for them. Let me help them shine. They are the sun. If I can help them shine, I will shine as a result of that, right? The moon gets its light from the sun. We will be a reflection, and we will shine as a result of that. And if we help connect these dots for people and help them understand the why, I think we're going to see the younger generation who can come up very quickly and plug the holes that we're starting to see as people are exiting the workforce and really add value in an astronomically fast way.
I think it's a great analogy. That's a great way to look at it. And all leadership should be like that. All leaders should take that approach. But that's a lesson for anybody in their 20s, early 20s, late 20s, probably even early 30s right now that are trying to find their way in their career is you have strengths that you probably take for granted within an organization, and ways that you can bring insights and value that I don't think any generation has been able to bring in the history of the way we work from a corporate America standpoint.
Yeah.
And it's not going to be easy, and you're going to have to approach it very hat in hand and from a humble approach, because you're going to get some resistance, but don't focus on how you do it so much as just showing people, but you have to do it without, you're going to bruise egos is the problem. In doing this, even when you try not to, you're going to bruise egos. And so it's going to have to be a very slow approach and show that you're not trying to show someone else up. Because for better or worse, that's kind of one of the stigmas that the younger working generation stereotypes probably, that's completely unreasonable, is getting right now. And I just don't believe that it's true. I think they're just learning they have to learn how to work in a culture with more generations than any of us ever have before. And we have a responsibility for taking them under our wing and showing them, just like somebody did us. But we don't think about the fact that when we're bashing the younger generation, it's our responsibility to train them.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. There's a saying, the guy who's going to be the keynote speaker at OGA Leadership here in just a few weeks, he told me years ago, he said, as I've gotten older and I've done all these different things, what I realize more and more and more is that my whole job here is just to be good dirt that can cultivate something new. And I think if we take that approach, man, we're going to see some great opportunities. We still got a lot to add, but we can help these other generations really come through, and we can help our businesses grow as a result of learning how to be, like you said, hat in hand, be that good dirt, just really help grow and add value. I just want to add value.
Amazing. That's an amazing way, I think, to cap it all off. And if we all approach everything from that perspective, everything else, a leader, a follower, or just trying to be a good member of an organization that just wants to lead themselves and do the right thing, if you take that approach, everything else will fall in line.
Yeah.
Well, man, I appreciate it. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Really loved the conversation. I know LinkedIn, where you and I connected, is that the best place for people to find you? Is there anything else, any parting words of wisdom that you would like to leave us with?
No, that's perfect. Yeah, connect on LinkedIn, and let's do this again sometime.
Awesome. Thanks, man. It's good talking to you.
You too. See you, Brad.
Thank you for listening to the Building Blocks podcast. If you found anything beneficial from today, I would appreciate you reaching out and letting me know on LinkedIn. I'm always looking for ways to add value to the listeners and interviewing leaders in our industry. If you found this helpful, I would appreciate if you leave us a review and reach out to me on LinkedIn and give me some feedback. In addition, if you know someone that would be good for an interview, please let me know and I'd be happy to connect with them. You can find myself and any of the other guests on LinkedIn, where we continue the conversations about leadership, careers, growth, and development.